Physics is just basically portraying weight and gravity. The way you portray the weight of an object and how gravity affects the world in your animation not only sets the rules that your animation follows, but it also characterizes the way you animate. Here are some examples of how different animators portray weight differently. There are a lot of different ways to convey weight in animations. For now, we'll start with the basic one, squash and stretch. As you can guess from the name, squash and stretch describes the technique of having things become compressed or elongated based on the forces acting on them or what they're acting on. Good examples of this are old Disney cartoons, or things like Tom and Jerry, Looney Tunes, and etc. The golden age of animation in America around the 80s and 90s had a lot of squash and stretch. There's still a fair amount of it now, but those cartoons introduced it and spread this technique. Zack is popular for using this technique to show the weight or impact of something in his animations. He pulls a lot of inspiration from old cartoons. A good example of this is his Waddle Dee vs. Goomba 1-minute melee animation. Crazy Chris Tyler is similar to Zack in this respect. A notable example from him would be his Bill Cipher vs. Sans 1-minute melee animation. These are just examples of the technique being used in sprite animation from a couple of people. There are more animators out there that use this technique in a lot of different ways. Squash and stretch can be used in small or in great amounts. It should be proportional to the force acting on the person or object or what the person or object is acting on. At its best, squash and stretch is used for cartoonishly exaggerating the weight of something to the audience. It's funny, it's quirky, and it's familiar to most people that watch animations. At its worst, and when used in excess, it gives everything in the animation a rubbery feel that will seem out of place or strange to some people. For example, a giant cube of solid iron should squash and bounce like a rubber ball. However, for exaggeration, you can stretch it out if it's falling to emphasize its speed. You have to be very deliberate when employing this technique. Another technique is anticipation, or creating the sense that something will happen and following through. People will feel satisfied when something is set up to happen, and it does happen. It also lets you follow the line of action a lot easier. A good example of anticipation in animation is Mega Man X's shooting animation. In case you've never played Mega Man X before, when you press the button to shoot, he shoots out little lemons. But when you hold the button, he starts to charge up a bigger blast, and depending on how long you hold the blast, the stronger the blast is. Imagine if you held the button enough to get a good charge and a little baby lemon came out. That'd be strange, not satisfying either. Now imagine if you pressed the button one time really fast and you fired a giant blast that killed the boss in one hit. That wouldn't be very satisfying either. The general idea is, if there's a big wait for something to happen, it needs to deliver something as big as the wait time. Another concept to get a good understanding of is easing. Easing is just the idea of things speeding up or slowing down. This goes into anticipation as well. Basically, if something isn't going to be moving that fast, it doesn't need to ease into the movement for too long, or ease out for that long either. A real-life example would be, a car going really fast needs a lot of time to slow down compared to one that's going slowly, right? Or a jab from a boxer is the fastest tool in their kit to fight. It happens quickly and stops just as soon as it starts. But a haymaker is a huge punch that takes a while to start up, but once it does, it fires out and takes a while to pull back in. Easing essentially comes down to these questions. How many frames does this need? And how far does it need to move from one frame to the next? Think about those questions as you animate different things. You'll find that different situations have different answers. There's no catch-all technique for this. For example, to animate a heavy punch, let's play this clip from Hajime no Ippo.
もっと踏み込みを強くしてみろ。
踏み込みですか？
踏み込んだ瞬間、腰をグイッと入れる。肩も内側にひねり込むように。
はい。踏み込み、腰、肩。よーし。
You see, you really need to help sell the weight transferring through your body. You step in, get that torque in for the hips and shoulders, and the punch is thrown instantly, and the follow-through is the snap or shock of the body. Then there's secondary animation. This one is simple. If you have a guy with big baggy clothes and a cape doing somersaults, you could animate just the guy doing the somersault, draw the clothes, and leave it at that. But clothes move when the person wearing them moves. Secondary animation comes down to things like that. Besides the main event of what you want the audience to see happening, what is everything else doing? If you have a girl with long hair swinging a sword around, you could just animate her twirling around and the sword. That accomplishes the goal. But secondary animation goes for a little more realism than that. How are her movements affecting the things around her? If she's wearing a long dress, does it flutter up and lift up as she spins? If she's moving in a grassy field, is she kicking up rocks and scattering grass petals? Is her hair flowing in the wind? These are things you need to consider when you're animating. If you want to sell impact in your animations, you need to be able to use the principles we discussed to help portray that weight.